Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GeekWave. This is the low-budget show. It's the show so low it has no budget. Perhaps some of you out there have GeekWave mania. It is sweeping across the nation. It started overseas. It's now coming to America. We're first going to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show, and then from there on, just we'll have a falling out, and then we'll just become iconography throughout all of time and space. So there you go. Perfect. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Beatles. I don't know. We'll get into it. We have a lot of news to not a lot of news, but important news to talk about. And this episode is solely inspired by a piece of Beatles news that did come out about a thing we're going to be developing, which is kind of insane. And I just wanted to talk about the Beatles in general and their place in filmography and their place as iconography. I don't know. It's crazy. I am a Beatles fan. It's so weird to say that. I feel like, well, I guess we could cover that more when we get to the actual main topic, but I do feel like the Beatles have entered a place of pop culture where, like, saying you like them isn't weird, but if you say you like them too much, it is weird, where it's like, really? You like the Beatles that much? It's very strange. It's like how if you say, like, my favorite movie is, like, The Godfather. You're like, really? You like the greatest film ever made? That's your favorite movie? It's very strange. But whatever. It's cool, I guess. I don't know. It's a weird time for Beatles. And by that I mean, we're still doing Beatles stuff, hey? Whatever. But we do have some pieces of news to talk about. Some important things to talk about, if you will. Because who would have thought we'd be here talking about some of this stuff. The first big piece of news we have to talk about is something that matters to a lot of people. And it's been talked about for a while now. That is the official casting announcement for Fantastic Four. This movie has been long talked about, and it feels like everyone's been waiting forever to talk about this movie, to have it made. So it's going to come out in July of 2025. I would not be surprised if that is moved back to November because we haven't started filming yet. We just got the casting announcement. All of these actors are busy. They got press promotions coming up for a bunch of stuff. Very weird. I don't know, but here's our cast for Fantastic Four, news that is old and irrelevant at this point. Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, Vanessa Kirby as Susan Storm, Eben Moss-Backrack as Benjamin Grimm, and Joseph Quinn as Jonathan Stormathan. Yeah. I'm indifferent to the casting overall. I think there's two that I really like, and it's the same two that everybody really likes, Eben Moss-Backrack is a Jewish actor. He has the physicality and, like, the gruffness. He seems like he's sad on the inside, and that really works for Benjamin Grimm. And he doesn't have to commit too much of his body to making this movie, so that works really well for him. I'm all on board for that. And Vanessa Kirby, she just looks like a quiet, timid mouse that nobody really thinks about in, like, a big way. And then she's just gonna, like, blow your mind with how good she is at doing everything. That's the vibe I get from Vanessa Kirby. I have not seen a single thing that Joseph Quinn has acted in. He looks like a classically handsome guy where you're like, if you drew a picture of, like, a guy from the 60s and said, this is what the kids thought was sexy, he does have that, big face of a Paul McCartney, but just bigger eyes. So, yeah, I'm for it. He looks like he's a handsome devil. A little bit older than a guy like Tom Holland, but younger than the rest of the people. I do like the notable age gaps. I think it works really well for, like, 30, 35 to 45 and 50. That works really well. I think there should be a noticeable age difference between Reed and Sue, and that is what we're getting here. So those are fine. Pedro has yet to do a role where I'm like, oh yes, I love this. My thing with Pedro in this role, and it's not a big thing, I just don't know if he can do, like, high status. He seems like he's a man of the earth, like he's salt of the earth. Like, this guy, he's down to earth, he's fun, he's just adorkable. And Reed's kind of more like autistically adorkable, where there's something more high functioning about him than what you can really imagine. And I don't know if Pedro can really get there. Maybe he can. It'd be cool to see that. I just have yet to see it from any of his performances. He just seems like a nice guy. But this is another father role for him if we're going to get Franklin and Valeria, probably. Look, there's a piece of artwork that came out. Those are not what the suits are going to look like. Herbie's in it. We'll get Griffin Newman in there. Don't worry. And then I don't know. It's set in the '60s, I guess. I don't know. I have no real. I wish I was more excited. I am a Fantastic Four fan. I love the Lee and Kirby stuff. It's some of my favorite things from Marvel. I just wish I could be like, I know it's gonna be good, because I don't think it is. Like, I shouldn't say I don't think it's gonna be good. What I mean to say is, I don't have the ability to think Marvel Studios is going to produce something better than their usual middling film. I don't. And with the timeline we have now, here's another thing I do want to talk about, and this is a whole other Marvel problem, which we could get into another time. They're rewriting a lot of scripts currently. We just found out somebody is rewriting the script for Thunderbolts, and that comes out in May. Somebody's working on rewriting the script for Fantastic Four and Blade, and Daredevil just had it. It really feels like the movie side of the Marvel umbrella has been taking the old Marvel method approach, where it's like, get the artist to draw the stuff first, have a vague idea of the story, and then fill it in with words. That's what it feels like's happening right now with all this crap. And that's insane to me. I don't know why that'd be the case, but I remain unconvinced that this is going to be a great movie. I am genuinely excited, though. I think it could be pretty cool. But I've been let down before, so I'm not, buzzing about the news. Same with this one. We are currently in a slate where a bunch of biopics are coming out. The Bob Marley One Love movie just came out. I will say this about the movie. It's not very good. The first couple of minutes are pretty impressive, and then it gets lost in its own flashbacks and self-importance, and I don't like that. The Amy Winehouse one, I'm very hesitant on that one. And we'll come back to more biopic news when we get into, the main topic, but Ridley Scott, a guy who is famous for just pumping out film, and they're all about 6s or 7s, he is attached reportedly to make the BeeGees movie. And I'm like, okay, if there's one guy I know is not going to do the specific biopic thing, it's Ridley Scott. He is going to hone in on a very specific moment and make a very weird movie about it. And that gets me more excited for a biopic thing than truly anything. Him just being I don't know, farting, whatever, that's kind of exciting. That's genuinely exciting and a genuine idea that I am interested in. So that wins for me, where I'm like, yeah, cool, you're going to do something weird, you insane son of a bitch. That's pretty cool. But a BeeGees movie, why not? It feels like we have to get them all out there, or else we lose the licensing rights to this famous person. Well, I'll say about that too, the Bob Marley movie is performing surprisingly well. So I guess releasing an iconic black character, I shouldn't say character, an iconic black person biopic in Black History Month when there's really no other fanfare to give to people has worked out to the benefit of that movie. Would not be surprised if by the time this episode comes out, it's number one for the second week in a row. I don't really know what the competition would be. It's not Drive Away Dolls, that's for bloody sure. It ain't Madam Web. But this is kind of cool, I guess. I don't know. BeeGees, they're not my guys, but Ridley Scott, I trust to do everything. He's wrapping up Gladiator 2. He has another project that he's also working on, and then I suppose after that he's going to do the BeeGees one. Whatever. Here's something else we have to talk about. We have our first trailer for a new movie releasing this August called Borderlands. This is based off the popular video game. Here's what I'll say about the game side of Borderlands. You all know I don't play many video games. The games I've played that have been turned into series and movies, Uncharted and Halo, and I've played a little bit of Fallout. I've only played those because I have friends with Xboxes and PlayStations where I have just done that for a day or something. I've played a lot of Call of Duty, but that's just because I didn't go to school and I was just at a friend's house playing Call of Duty. But this one again, Borderlands, I specifically remember there was one day where I played this for a couple hours. And I didn't know which game it was. It could be the second game or whatever. But I was a character that either was or looked like the Cate Blanchett character in the movie, and you went around to like places and you killed people. The vibe I got was very much that it's trying to do like a Mad Maxy thing where it's like, here's a dystopian world or something. But in the trailer, Blanchett says she hates this planet. So are they on a different planet? I don't know. I've never played it long enough to get the impression of what it could be. But you know what? I guess relatively speaking, I think Eli Roth is a decent director. Thanksgiving didn't upset me last year. And I don't know, this one, they filmed it like 4 years ago. They filmed it a long time ago. And one of, wasn't it Craig or Greg? Yeah, it was Greg Masson who like wrote the script, but he changed his name. So it's like not his actual name that's getting credited up there. His pseudo name. I don't know. So the trailer looked terrible. I don't know what they were thinking. It's such like this clear, like, we want to be Guardians, we want to be Suicide Squad, we want to have so much fun, but just the bright colors and everything. Having just seen Argyle, it's not that exciting anymore to have this distinctive vision come to screen. I love Cate Blanchett, and I could watch her do anything. I really like her, but she's the only person in this cast that would make me go, oh yeah, now we're talking. Because Kevin Hart and Jamie Lee Curtis are also in this. And I'm like, what? Why? I will say Ariana Greenblatt, she's Tiny Tina, which is a character. And this might be the role that makes people go, oh yeah, she's an actress. She's been in a lot of stuff lately. And she is talented for a child. But you could tell they filmed this before she hit puberty. Because she looks really young. Like younger than she looks now. And if you see a picture of her now and like when this movie comes out, you're like, oh, they definitely filmed this like 3 years ago before this girl was in Barbie or Ahsoka or 65. Like, she has grown up. But you know what? Who cares? I don't think this is going to be anybody's favorite movie, so what's the point of really doing it? Is Borderlands like a game people love? I don't know. I don't hear anybody talking about it. But again, I'm not really in the circles about people talking about this kind of stuff. So maybe it's like a beloved property that people are salivating over. What I'll say is I could watch Cate Blanchett do anything. And that you could take to the bank. Now we have one more piece of news to talk about. And that is that we talked about this last episode, that Universal wants their next Jurassic World movie to come out in July of 2025. We are currently in February of 2024, which means they have 18 months to film that and put it out. And they just got a director attached. We all thought it was going to be David Leitch for a minute. He doesn't want to do it. But, you know, classic journeyman who has never been problematic to work with in a big studio like film, Gareth Edwards is now signed on to do the movie. You know, the guy behind Rogue One, where they famously had to get somebody else to do the reshoots. He did the Godzilla film from 2014 that was really good in scope and feel. He recently did The Creator, which was a really interesting movie that had a really interesting idea behind it and looked really good. I guess you get him because, one, he made something look really good for a cheaper budget than like the $200 million fare. He knows how to do scope really well. I guess, like, it's really sad to say, like, he makes one independent movie. It's an original idea. It doesn't do perfectly well, and now he has to go back to the franchise thing. But that is like this era where if your independent thing doesn't do perfect, do the studio movie. You're already making like a big blockbuster of The Creator anyways. Do a couple of them and then come back and do another one for yourself. You know, I'm always for that. That's really interesting. But I don't know, like, I just wouldn't make this movie, but whatever, we have to have stuff out there, I guess. I don't know. It's crazy. Everything's weird, everything's bad, but Gareth Edwards, I'm sure he'll do good. He can't do worse than Trevorrow. What's Trevorrow up to these days? Was he supposed to do something? I can't remember. Sorry, I want to just say this too, because I was just opening up Twitter/X to look at this, so the reported budget for Ridley Scott's Gladiator 2 increased from $165 million to around $310 million. Holy shit, dude. That's like Dial Up Destiny numbers, man. It could look. It'll probably make its money back. I'm hoping for a May Kalamawe Oscar nom from that movie, but we'll see what happens. Gladiator 2 could be Avatar: Way of Water of the year, not in terms of like box office, but like, oh, people think this prestigious sequel to a movie we all supposedly forgot about, is actually really cool and impressive. And we have real actors in here. That's really awesome. So I'm on board for that. But hey, that's all the news we have. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll jump into the world of the Beatles. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, the Bob Marley movie is overperforming. I don't think anybody truly expected it to overtake Madam Web in the first weekend, but it did. It's like 80 million worldwide. Like, the movie is just like crushing right now. Let's actually check out Box Office Mojo. We'll head to worldwide. Yeah, it is at 85 million worldwide, 56 domestic. It is currently the third highest grossing film of 2024. That, of course, is going to change come the new season of everything. But it's outgrossing Argyle and Madam Web. It's behind The Beekeeper. It is behind Mean Girls, both of those doing more domestic and worldwide. But it's doing surprisingly well. And then we, of course, have the Amy Winehouse one coming out this year as well. Do we have another one? Michael Jackson is next year. The Michael Jackson biopic is next year. We saw pictures of that. I didn't really want to talk about it because I feel, we're talking about the Beatles in a vagueness today. I feel like I could talk about Michael Jackson in like a vagueness as well. Obviously, one of the groups holds up a little better than the other singer. So, But it was announced very recently that director Sam Mendes, who is a very notable filmmaker who's made some of your favorite films, I'd imagine, American Beauty, Road to Perdition, Jarhead, Revolutionary Road, Away We Go, Skyfall, Spectre, 1917, Empire of Light. Some of those are okay. Empire of Light, atrocious of a film, but whatever. He's signed on to work on a project from Sony Pictures that he is going to make a biopic for the Beatles. But here is the catch, folks. Instead of just having one film about the band The Beatles, this is going to be 4 separate films that each show different perspectives, but the same events, I suppose. So we're going to have a John Lennon movie, a Paul McCartney movie, a George Harrison movie, and a Ringo Starr movie. All of these are supposedly going to release in 2027. That is truly insane. This is a crazy attempt of a thing. Because you have to imagine the market for 4 Beatles films in the same year is not that high. You have to imagine you're only going to get so many people to go to one. Now, what I do like about that news, just as a vague generalization, is that it skews away from the argument being one-sided towards the other. Where if we just made it too much about John or Paul, we would lose sight of the other members. If it was just too much of like, oh, George doesn't matter to the piece, it would lose sight of that too. It's a very interesting thing to see happen, where you're like, there is probably no other band you could do this for. ABBA, maybe. The Rolling Stones, maybe. But these guys, they are 4 distinctive personalities on themselves. They have 4 distinctive beats. They have 4 distinctive roles within the Beatles themselves. Actually attempting to tell all those stories earnestly is a good idea. But at the same time, there is something that could get lost in the translation of doing each work independently, that the clear message of the director is still that one-sided. It's this thing I've talked about before. Coming from a comic book background and growing up around comic books, you could do a Stan Lee movie. And if Disney were to make one today, if Disney said we're doing a Stan Lee biopic, it would never come across as fully authentic because it is through Disney, who is making him a Jim Henson, a Walt Disney. We can't show the sides of him where maybe his contemporaries or people in the industry aren't truly in love with him. Whereas if an independent party made it, there's still the other side of the argument where they'd make it a hate piece against Stan. And it'd be more like, well, everything good that happened was Ditko or Kirby or Buscema or the other guys. And Stan was just like this monger who took all the power for himself kind of thing. You run the risk of doing that no matter what kind of biopic you make. When you're doing 4 separate movies about each Beatle, you still run the argument of being biased towards one of them. Perhaps you are painting John in a certain way, and then John in the George or Ringo or Paul movie also comes across that way, but now we are just doing it in a less truthful manner because in the Paul movie we have to have him act this way. It's very complicated how you would do that, because you run the risk of making it biased towards, okay, let's just use George as the example, because George is kind of the third wheel to like the other two, right? He quit the Beatles, of course, famously. If you paint like Paul and John as like these really nice guys in their movies, but then in the George movie they're kind of just like indifferent to him and perceived as like rude, it just doesn't feel earnest. It feels less like we're documenting and more like we're doing a one-sided argument for each of the Beatles. I guess I don't want this to become like, oh man, they all secretly hate each other and we only see what they really feel in their own movies. It's a very interesting risk that they are playing here. And I genuinely don't know if it could work or there's going to be the audience capacity for it. It would be, and this is a weird comparison, but it'd be like making 4 Ninja Turtle movies and each one of them's about one of the turtles. You're like, well, we kind of just want to see them together. And sure, we could do separate stuff for them. But what would be more interesting, to me at least, I think the more interesting angle to play with would be following their careers after the band split up. What did they go on to do? What did George go on to create? The music that Paul went on to create. That could be more interesting to explore than watching the same movie from 4 different perspectives. That is a very interesting experiment to make. I don't know if it's truly one the audience could be interested in doing. I watched all of the Beatles Get Back. And I think that series, or that mini-series, or special, whatever you want to call it, was really showing you everything you need to know. It's about one session in particular and like the events of just like that couple of months working in, that studio and their last performance together. And there was like the shitty interpretation of that movie that originally came out in like the 70s. But that kind of sold you on everything you need to know about the band. And I think that the viewing on that was pretty good, because what else do you need to see? We saw the tension, we saw the dynamics, you definitely saw them towards the end of their rope, and you kind of saw Paul trying to just like, I want to play with my friends, but this isn't where we're at anymore, and the tensions were too high, and nobody was really enjoying themselves truly. And I don't know what doing a biopic for all of them gets from that. And it's kind of like this thing where it could be we follow their origins to how they meet each other, which could be interesting, but it also could be really freaking boring, where we know they're all going to get together. Is it more interesting to have like one specific moment that we see, like post the Beatles, as I suggested, or Get Back like we saw from Peter Jackson, as opposed to the formulaic biopic stuff, but from 4 different perspectives? I guess it's going to be very interesting to see. So it sounds like they're going to film this all at once, and we'll have all the actors together, and all their separate stuff will be separate, so that could be interesting. immediately, like, the memes and the jokes came out, like, oh, you can do, like, Paul McCartney's movie is like the sweet rom-com, but Ringo's is going to be like the spacey head trip about, like, a puppet come to life. And that's fun. If you were doing, like, a different interpretation of that, it'd be kind of cool, as opposed to watching, like, the After Party, which is, like, an Apple TV show where it's just people recounting stories from their own mind. I don't know. This feels very weird. I don't know if it's going to work. The films are set to be released in 2027, so we got 4 years to get those made. That's crazy. 2027, I can't even fathom that timeline. Like, that is so fucking far away. But that's so crazy. And what this episode is also about, I just kind of want to touch upon the other films that the Beatles have been associated with, like films about the Beatles or documentaries about the Beatles, that kind of stuff. I find it very interesting. And this is, again, this is one of the only bands you could do this with, if not the only band you could do this with, because you have this thing that has stood the test of time, and their music is iconic, their looks are iconic, they've become a staple of pop culture. They are on the same level as Elvis. Some might say they are higher than Elvis. I would definitely say, in terms of like the younger generation, and I talked about this when we talked about the Baz Luhrmann Elvis movie and the Sofia Coppola Priscilla movie. Elvis has not really become like, nobody worships at the altar of Elvis Presley that's like younger than 30. We have new things we like. We have new characters we like, actors, and just singers and songwriters, even of that era. There are ones that hold up better, which is why doing a Michael Jackson biopic is so fascinating. And we'll talk about the Michael Jackson one when it comes out. But that movie could be one of two things. It could be the Bob Marley movie where it shies away from the actual hardship that comes from this. Or it could be, look at this young man who was broken by his father, broken by this industry, and became this hard shell of a vessel who never could truly escape it. I doubt they do that, but who knows? But out of all of that even, I do think the Beatles just hold up better in a different way. Is it because they have this, like, British invasion energy where they're just, British guys who are funny and silly. They don't take anything seriously. They are more than just like singers and all that stuff. They were performers in so many different ways. They had a very specific look and feel to them. It was just like this perfectly curated thing. It was the One Direction of its time. You took these guys who just made something special and they became the best of their craft, and they just worked together, and the stint they had together was so short and brief. It never truly like did anything aside from that. But I'm very interested in seeing why that works, because this is the other thing I've always talked about too. It's the jokes we make today about the things we used to make jokes about before. You could make an Elvis joke today in like a Disney Channel original. Is it going to play to a 15-year-old? I feel if you made a joke about the Beatles today, it would play relatively the same. Because I do think everybody knows who the Beatles are. Whether you listen to their music or not, you know the songs. You know a lot of their songs. They are prominent people. Paul McCartney is still touring. Like, you know who these people are. They just survived longer than a lot of people of their generation because they just hit this certain nerve that has never truly been hit before, and they just exploded. They became like the biggest thing in the world. And that's something we don't truly see anymore. And they just did it at like the right time where everything was in flux. They had a different energy than the guys around them, and they just became this prominent thing. They also, through their entire career, managed to reinvent themselves numerous times, where they started off as one thing, and then they completely switched into a different type of genre. They became a whole other band. Now, I would argue I know more about the Beatles than like a normal person, but I am not by any ways like a Beatle maniac who knows every single detail. I know the key moments. I know the key albums. I pretty much know everything we need to know. And what I'm fascinated by is both the shift in musical tone that they have from like their earlier albums to their later albums to like their last types of albums. And you can see the switch pretty clearly. It's when they start doing acid and experimenting with like the world music and all that stuff, and it's still good. Like I don't think they have any bad music, because you have one of the best songwriters of all time in Paul McCartney, and he's just this amazing guy. And personally, I love a lot of their earlier stuff. That's just where I go to with them, but I don't hate any of it. I don't hate any of it. Now, saying all this, saying that they are the biggest people in the world, there has been countless books written about them. There's like that big compendium that's just like someone who like chronicles the entirety of their like existence as a band. There's also that website that tracks like the day-to-day of the Beatles doing whatever they want at whatever given time. They have been talked about to death. So more than maybe any other band, the idea to do the definitive biopic feels so ridiculous. Do you remember when like Paul McCartney, I'm sorry, I don't know why I said Paul McCartney. Do you remember when Robert Zemeckis, that's the name I wanted to say, was going to do like a remake of Yellow Submarine, but it's going to be like a motion capture thing. We have like that video reel out there of like the energy it was going to have. That was weird. And that makes a little more sense to me than doing the definitive biopic. And doing 4 of them is even more crazy. Because at this point, you either know everything you want to know about the Beatles, or you are purposely ignoring everything about them that you might want to know, or that you could know. I think everyone at this point knows the names John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, Yoko Ono to a lesser extent. Like, everyone knows the names. So I just don't know what we are going to be getting from that. But whatever. So they have actually been a part of multiple films. Like I said, Let It Be earlier, that they filmed that when they were doing like their studio recordings in '69. They had the original film that came out that hid a lot of the stuff. The Beatles Get Back uses all like the unused footage from that and condensed it into one thing. Before that, you had a bunch of other stuff like A Hard Day's Night, which is a really good movie about like guys just being different and silly, and they just come over here to America and everything's bizarre and everyone's just talking to them weirdly, and they're just kids having fun. Help is kind of like that too. Of all of these like their Beatles movies, the best one is probably A Hard Day's Night. You know, Yellow Submarine is trippy. It's weird. You know, it's an animated jukebox musical fantasy adventure, and you're like, sure. Magical Mystery Tour, strange. But A Hard Day's Night, that is the definitive Beatles movie because it plays music. It kind of birthed the idea of like the music video as well, where you're like, we're going to have them sing the song on the camera and people are going to respond to that. So that's kind of interesting. There have also been multiple documentaries about the Beatles because they are like the like prominent band that people want to talk about. I don't know how much more I need to say about like the actual documentaries. Everybody has made some. Perhaps the definitive one is The Beatles Get Back, but that has not stopped anybody from making multiple ones. They have been making these since the 60s, since they have been around. They've been making Beatles documentaries. Because people love the Beatles. We're always going to make Beatles stuff for some reason. And that's okay. You know, like, it's fine to do that. But eventually there comes a point where you have to ask yourself, what else are we truly saying about the Beatles? In the 90s, there was the mini-series about the careers. The Beatles Anthology, I believe it was called. That was 8 episodes. So how much more are we saying that hasn't been said there? I don't know. Remember when Ron Howard made one about like their early touring years, and it was just like, okay, if you want to, Ron Howard, go ahead. I don't understand what they're getting from this. I don't know. It's all kind of weird to me, but I guess it doesn't matter. So there are some stories from the Beatles fans, blah, 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 that try to do the biopic thing with them. And you're just like, I guess there's like the birth of the Beatles from 79, and there's the Beatlemania movie. And we've tried it so many times. And there's the TV movie about John and Yoko, which you're like, I mean, okay, if you want. That one's more about like the end of Lennon. And I think just like even on paper, you could just do like the Lennon one. So I do kind of respect like Sam Mendes for being like, no, we're going to do all of them. That's something to say. But there really isn't anything. So we had the like John and Yoko one, then we had like the Linda McCartney one, and you're like, whatever. None of them are just great. What was that weird one? There was a weird one where it was just like it was about like McCartney and John just like talking or something. Who cares? Like I guess like I'm looking at the list now. I'm on Wikipedia. I'm looking at like the fictionalized Beatles, like stories of the Beatles, not the documentary or not movies that the Beatles made themselves. And I look at this and I'm like, I truly guess there isn't a definitive biopic in here. The closest I would say we got was Nowhere Boy, which was about John Lennon, focusing when he was younger and some of his weird relationships with the women in his life. And that, the most notable thing I think about that movie is that is the movie where Aaron Taylor Johnson met his wife, Samantha Louise Taylor Johnson. And you're like, oh, right, he's playing a young boy and the director of the film is a grown woman. And in the movie, John Lennon, who he plays, has a weird relationship with older women. And you're like, okay. That might be the closest we truly got to doing it, where it's like not a TV movie or anything like that. And you'll notice that we talked about all of these. They're John and Yoko. They're John and Yoko. They're Linda McCartney. They're John and Paul. They're not about Ringo or George. You're like, why? There's also a bunch of stuff about like the death of John Lennon, which I get. Like, what else are you really gonna say? I don't know. It's weird. Another television movie with Christopher Eccleston as Lennon comes out in 2010. I don't think any of these are like stuff you should watch. So I guess I should retract my statement by saying we've done it enough. Perhaps we've never truly done it the way that, you know, we do all these things now. I just fear it's going to be like fucking Bohemian Rhapsody, where it's the worst thing you've ever seen. Maybe it won't be. But that's not all that happens with Beatles on film, because there's also like a bunch of movies that come out about the Beatles that are inspired by the Beatles. And you're like, that's very bizarre. So Robert Zemeckis, one of his earliest films was called I Want to Hold Your Hand, which was about a group of girls who want to like go meet the Beatles. And it's like a coming of age film about like these girls that want to go see the Beatles and do stuff with them. So that's fun. I Am Sam had a lot of focus on the Beatles too, which whatever. It's just really weird. There was the Ruddles, which was like the weird Eric Idle thing where he's like, I'm going to make a parody of it. All you need is cash, you know, like whatever. It's very weird that we keep trying to do like weird Beatles stuff, I guess. And perhaps the most insane is like Yesterday from Danny Boyle, where it's like, what if this guy sang Beatles song and when he woke up the next day, nobody knew who the Beatles were, so he could take credit for all the music, and then John Lennon was actually alive, and he's like, yeah, do your thing. Weird. Like, it's weird. Like, you can't make that movie like today, which is only 5 years removed from when it came out, but it's so bizarre that in 2019 we could make a movie where it's like, everyone knows the Beatles. Well, what if nobody knew who they were? It's very weird. It's crazy. It's crazy how many things we've made for the Beatles, but none of them are truly like a definitive version. I mean, you can watch all of it and get like an estimation of who these guys are. But I just can't see how like doing 4 biopics, each presenting one of them in a different way, is going to be the definitive version. That really doesn't seem like it would happen to me. But whatever. Maybe it is. Maybe it'll work. I just don't see it working. I don't know. Look, the Beatles, they could stand the test of time. They have stand the test of time. They've existed longer than most things ever have. And they, for some reason, just continue to breathe new life into themselves, which is really interesting. There's always something new coming out about them, which is kind of interesting too, which also makes you go, like, what are we going to really say about this movie or in these movies? Because Beatlemania, it's never going to be as strong as it was back then, and just the culture at large just doesn't support things that way anymore. So I don't know. I don't really know how it's going to go. It could go well, it could go bad, but I'm kind of glad it exists. That's kind of a fun idea. Either way, I guess we'll see. Won't we? We will see what happens. End of the day, who knows? Things exist all the time. But I don't know. The Beatles, there's a lot of them. We still make Beatles stuff. I like their music. I like them enough, and I think just trying to keep telling the story, it does seem repetitive. But if this is going to be the last one we do, where we're going to do like 4 movies, one about each of them, sure. Then why not do a 5th one where it's all of them come together? Like the song. Then that's the definitive version. You don't have to play with them ever again. That should be the end. That should be the end. But I always just love seeing like things that sweep pop culture and take over in a specific tone. And it's kind of cool that the Beatles can do that, and they did. It's very interesting. The last time we really saw it was like the Jonas Brothers and, One Direction, because we'll never have that fever again. There's just too much stuff now, and then you never have the Beatles made today, because like every single like one of like our like young musicians, they just smoke weed all the time. Like, it's not special to do acid anymore and like dress like Sergeant Pepper. It's not special. We just don't do it. But they did, and that would be a weird section of the movie. It would be cool if you did like a specific era of the Beatles for each of the movies, as opposed to here they are as kids, to when they meet, to when they do the music, to when they break up, which is what that's going to be. Because if I had to see like the same shot where they're all like recording, but we're going to like focus on a specific one for whatever the time is, who cares? What is that? But it's kind of fun. Nowhere Boy being the closest they have to a proper biopic is really disheartening and terrifying to think about. But hey, who knows? Anything can be good. But musical biopics are hardly that good. Just look at Bob Marley, One Love. A bad movie. Now, thank you all for listening to this Beatlemania episode. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And of course, I will catch you in the next one. Remember, folks, all you need is love. Don't let me down. And dig a pony. Good luck.